Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Bolt Action Reloading. In this week's episode, we're going to cover 5 luxury reloading tools that you might want on your reloading bench. Stick around. Welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time here and you'd like to see how I and the rest of me here make our group smaller, start now by subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell icon. That way you get notified when I post next week's video and you won't miss anything. Guys, for today's video, I thought we would cover some of the more what I would call luxury items for a reloader. Now, if you're just starting off, I don't want you to think if you don't have any of this equipment, you're not going to be able to make effective reloads. That is not the case. The deeper you get into some of this stuff, sometimes you'll find that some of these tools can make your life a lot easier or give you information that you didn't previously have. Well, all these things on the table here are going to fall into different levels of that area. I thought today in our video, we would just kind of quickly go over some of these items, kind of the rationale of why we have them, why we might need them, and you can decide whether or not they apply to your situation. All of these tools vary in price a little bit, but certainly are in what I would call getting on to be a luxury item, certainly because you can buy a basic reloading kit for less than the price of most of these tools individually. I don't want to scare any of you new reloaders off. However, some of these items might be something you pick up in the future, or maybe not at all, and we might even talk about some alternatives and why they might be useful for you. Before I get into these guys, I basically have videos, which I will put in the description box below, of most of these items individually. I have a couple videos standalone on the Annealer, at least one covering the Giraud trimmer. In the scale area of this, we're going to cover actually both of these scales a little bit. And I don't really have a specific video on the Magnetospeed because Lord knows there's enough of those on YouTube. Either way, let's kind of go over these individually and we'll learn about why I purchased these and whether or not they might be applicable to you or help out your reloading process. In no particular order, one of the tools I've had for a little bit while is this Annealing Made Perfect Annealer. Depending on your situation, whether or not you actually need an annealer is very personal. If you're just reloading pistol, I don't think an annealer is going to be of any use to you whatsoever. However, I primarily load bottleneck rifle cartridges, and I literally anneal every single firing. I do not think that there's any negative to doing that. I think the primary reasons for annealing are going to be increasing our brass life, as well as making the standard deviations lower on our reloads, which should help make our reloads more consistent from lot to lot. This is a Generation 1. There's actually a Generation 2 out now. The Generation 2 starts somewhere in the ballpark of $1,400 these days. The Generation 1 annealer was quite a bit cheaper when I purchased it. And besides the actual annealer itself, you need to buy these inserts depending on the cartridges that you want to load. These are individual. Once you make the investment though, the cartridge-to-cartridge inserts really aren't that expensive considering, and so I basically can anneal every single caliber that I reload for. But making that initial investment is a jump. I thought basically buy once, cry once. Now, as far as alternatives to this, I know that there are some salt bathing systems. I believe you use a lead melting pot. Generically speaking, since I'm lazy, one of the best things about this is being able to do it very quickly without any real setup time. Basically, being able to put our insert into our annealer and turn on the power switch, looking up a program number, and we're right at annealing. So if I want to reload 20 cartridges or 50 cartridges, in 15 or 20 minutes, I can be done. I don't have to wait for anything to warm up. I don't have to worry about setting a flame. I don't have to worry about doing any of those things. I know I turn this thing on, put my insert on, and I'm annealing in probably less than a minute if I have my settings handy. Depending on, which mode you're using, I think that the average is somewhere around 7 seconds per casing. You can do some quick math, but it doesn't take very long to get through a lot of cartridges. If I decided for some reason not to anneal a lot, I could certainly do that. However, being able to be so efficient, so quick, and so easy to set up, it really is the only way that I would probably anneal, and one of the primary reasons why I bought it. Moving on down the line, we're going to talk about our Chargemaster. This is a Chargemaster 1500. I do think they still sell a scale. The newer powder dispensers weren't really out when I purchased this, and so maybe I would get a different one, but this item was over $300, and so that is why I'm putting it in the luxury section for our reloading equipment. There are light versions of this that are standalone powder tricklers now you can get for a little bit less money, and since I have the item next to it, might be what I would do at this point. Certainly nothing wrong with the Chargemaster. It works great, and I'm probably going to keep using it until it breaks. Generically speaking, why would you want to buy this? Because it dispenses powder and you don't have to measure it. It may not be exact every single time, and if you have a fancy scale sitting next to it, you might be surprised in the differences from charge to charge. However, generally it does hit the plus or minus 0.1 grains that it says that it does. However, it's just pretty easy for me by the time I get that charge weight, double check that I know that it's right, get it put into my case, put a bullet in and get the bullet seated. I've got another charge waiting. It's so fast and so convenient, being a little bit of a luxury item, and if charging powder takes you any time at all, this certainly speeds up your reloading process and is a great tool. Cheaper alternatives to this, there are some other powder tricklers that are out there now, I think from Franklin Arsenal, Lyman, and the such. I think for a little less than $200 now, depending on what your sale prices are, you can catch some of these things. But an auto powder dispenser is a great tool and can certainly speed up your reloading process and make it a lot more fun. Moving on down the line is the FX120i. I covered this video in my scale comparison video. This particular scale is certainly a luxury, and I'm just going to classify it as that. I've seen these anywhere between $430 and $500. Buying them directly from a distributor. If you go to Auto Trickler's website and look the links he has, you can probably get one of these for a much more reasonable price. I've gotten several comments on my scale video complaining that this is a $1,000 scale. I think Brownells does carry it for a little over $700. Not saying that you should pay that for it. Not even saying you should pay $400 for it. But to call this a scale is honestly improper. This is actually properly called a balance. I'm not going to get into all the technology in it, but you can pretty much measure to the actual kernel of powder of whatever powder you're measuring. It's very accurate, very repeatable, and my initial thought when I got this is that I might get the Auto Trickler set up for it. Since you can't buy the Auto Trickler as a scale and that combined, at least not from Adam who sells it, I thought I would at least make the initial investment in the scale, see what I thought about it, and see what it does for me. Now, in the combination with the Chargemaster, I find the Chargemaster gets me very close. If I want to be to the actual kernel of powder when I do my ladder testing, a lot of times it's right on, or I can adjust my powder charge by a kernel or two. I haven't really found the need to get the Auto Trickler set up. If my Chargemaster ever dies, that probably will be the next thing that I purchase. But at this point in time, the scale gets me very accurate readings with my powder. I know I'm basically to the kernel on my charge weight when I want to be, as well as I know I have some more brass testing that I want to do, and I want to give you guys some statistics on the brass, and I thought it more appropriate to have a more accurate scale. I know that some of the comments I got in my previous brass videos talked about accuracy and precision, and having a much more precise scale was something I wanted to do to be able to make my data that much better. Though I still think that it's valid, and to the 10th of a grain is where a lot of people are going to measure, and that might really need to be where all you measure. But this certainly is going to fall, into my opinion, the luxury item reloader. If you decide to get one of these and you like toys, you're probably not going to be disappointed. It's not really going to speed up your reloading process. At best, it's going to make it a little bit more accurate. For speed, adding the powder trickler is certainly going to be the biggest change. Moving right along, when we're talking about speeding up our process, the Giraud case trimmer is probably the biggest tool that I have on the bench here to speed up your reloading process. Its function is actually to trim your cases to length as well as chamfer and deburr them all in one step. I don't want to get into too much detail. I have its own video. Once it's set up for caliber, you can literally take about 3 to 4 seconds per case, stick your case in there. What you essentially end up with is a case that's trimmed to length, chamfered and deburred, perfect, ready to load. You might have to clean a little bit of the brass shavings out, but you're going to have to do that anyway. Every case is so consistent. Keep in mind you want to have a fairly accurate resizing process because it does index off the shoulder. At least as they're filming this video, this is going to set you back somewhere in the ballpark of $495 set up to trim one caliber. Yes, that's only one caliber. To get a separate case holder is going to be $38. If you want another cutting head, those are going to be almost $50 a piece. You don't have to have a separate cutting head for every single caliber size if you don't want to, but it does keep you from having to reset up the cutting head every single time, which you could be wasting some brass at that point, but if you're like me, you might have a couple extra pieces of brass laying around, so something you might want to think about. Either way, this thing is so fast and does such a great job chamfering and deburring that it's one of my favorite tools that I have in my reloading bench. I know that this tool allows me to be more efficient in my reloading process as well as maintain very good accuracy. It's certainly one of my most favorite tools here on my reloading bench. Last but not least, we're going to be talking about our Magnetospeed Chronograph. I'm sure this is going to be a controversial topic. And when I bought this, I don't even believe the lab radar was out because there seems to be this Magnetospeed lab radar war that's going on always. Yes, the Magnetospeed attaches to your barrel. It's going to make contact with your barrel to be able to read your speeds. But some people might not even consider a chronograph to be a reloading tool per se. I really don't think that you can get good, accurate information about your reloads without it. Some people like to load work up without one. By all means, it's a free country. Feel free to do so. I know when I initially started reloading that I would assume that my velocity was fairly close to what the book said it was. And I know that after I got my chronograph that some of my loads were close. I had some reloads that were over 200 feet per second off of book. And so without having a chronograph to actually know that information, I don't know how you would reload. Obviously, I mentioned already the lab radar. The lab radar runs somewhere in the ballpark of $550. I don't know if you can catch it on sale anymore these days. It has plenty of accessories to make it work better. I would think for $550 it would work pretty good out of the box, but I know there's lots of adapters and things that you can use for it. I know a lot of people that have them really like them, and I'm not hating on it. I believe the Magnetospeed retails for somewhere in the ballpark of $390. Depending on sales, you might be able to find it for $350 or less, depending. I know this is the V3. They have a more basic one. I believe it's around $200 if you wanted to fall into that speed, but a chronograph is certainly, well, I do consider it to be a needed tool. These particular ones that we're talking about, aka the Magnetospeed and the lab radar, are kind of on the luxury end. The light-based chronographs are going to be able to get you very close to the ballpark of what you're shooting. Most of the videos on chronographs like the Pro Chrono, I think have shown fairly reliable information. I just know from my case, the limited time that I'm able to get on the range, I want to be able to strap something on that I know that I'm going to get the data that I need. Besides the lab radar, I've tried to look at a couple different alternatives to see what I could recommend. And at least for right now, I keep coming back to the Magnetospeed. At some point in time, I do plan to do a little bit of accuracy testing with and without it. I think it's going to depend on your situation, how much it may or may not affect your groups, point of impact when you're doing your load development. And if you don't feel comfortable doing load development with a chronograph on there, don't bother. But if you want to be able to know the actual speed of your loads and give you a ballpark idea, if you've seen anything about the Scott Satterley load development style, it basically requires a chronograph. I do have individual videos on most of these items, and they will be linked in the description box below. If you're new to reloading, by all means, you do not need to get these initially. Certainly don't feel like you have to jump out and get these to be able to be an effective reloader, especially if you're reloading for shorter ranges. Your standard deviations really aren't going to come into play on hunting loads until you really got out to several hundred yards. My goal when I got into this was to be able to make reloads that will shoot to 1,000 yards and beyond. And I felt that some of these tools were probably going to be needed long-term to do that. And so I kind of broke it up over time. I certainly didn't buy these all overnight. And you might never need any of these. It's all up to you, depending on your reloading process and what your desires are. But I thought in today's video we would cover kind of my 5 top luxury items. There are different accessories and slightly different options now. And obviously as time goes on, there will be. An alternative to the Giraud case trimmer might be something like the Frankfurt Arsenal brass prep station. I know that if I didn't have the Giraud trimmer, I probably would have already purchased one of the Frankfurt Arsenal brass trimmers. If you would like to trim brass to length, it has a similar trimming feature where it indexes off the shoulder of the case to trim your cartridges to length. However, it does still have your chamfer and deburring it as a separate step. It's not near as fast as this is, but it's certainly way faster than doing it by hand. But if you're only doing a few cartridges, there's absolutely nothing wrong using the Lee system or one of the other much cheaper systems that trims your cases to length. Nothing wrong with those, but if you reload 5,000 rounds in 1 year, some of these things just speed up your process and eventually they become worth the money. At least to me. Even if you're not looking to pick up any luxury reloading items today, I sure hope you enjoyed today's video. If you have any comments or questions about any of the products we talked about today, please leave those in the comments section below. If you like the content I do here on the channel, make sure you subscribe, hit the bell icon so you get notified when I post next week's video. I hope to see you come back next week, and until then, stay safe in small groups.